Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Matchday 5 team selection. We're approaching the end of the tournament soon, and it's been a fun tournament, I have to be honest. I think that there have been more surprises, especially in the knockout stages, because there's a big separation between group stages where we think you see teams rotate, teams make excuses, fans make excuses, us maybe overreacting, underreacting to certain conditions and things like that. And as it turns out so far, I think we've been pleasantly surprised by a lot of things. What I'm looking at now is the expected sort of chance of qualifying towards the semifinals. I also use the qualification booster chip, but I think this is probably in Matchday 5 the last time you could actually use the qualification booster chip effectively, because unfortunately, within the semifinal round of the tournament, there's probably closer odds. As you can see, the odds have dropped compared to what they were last week, right? Last week we had teams with 80+% chance of going through. Now you only have Chelsea with a 74% chance of going through. All the other games are a lot closer, so your guarantee, I suppose, of picking 11 players who will qualify are quite low. I even struggled to do that last week, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But when it comes to strategy, I think when you look at semi-final percentages, Chelsea, as I said, have the highest chance to go there. And I think a lot of our transfers really should be used into Chelsea players, because as you can see, because they have such a dominant semi-final expectation, they're now the tournament favorites, and the betting lines and odds have moved there, and so has, for example, this Opta large data model. And what I would also say, as I've mentioned, is, I was impressed by teams like Real Madrid and Man City. One of them is no longer in the tournament, but Al Hilal were extremely great. I actually watched that game live. That was quite a big cost to my personal sleep, but they were just creating so many chances, and I think that not your typical team that where when Man City get, let's say, upset or maybe get drawn by Southampton, you just think they didn't really lay much of a finger on City. They had one chance. Al Hilal actually created multiple chances in the game. They found many opportunities to sort of slice through the defense of Man City, and a lot of that too is because they actually have, I think, enough quality within the team, not just in terms of pace in behind, but also specifically the actual creators, right? Like if it's Savage, Neves with some set pieces, Cancelo in open play. These kind of things were really, really impressive. PSG were expectedly dominant versus Inter Miami. Bayern Munich, I think, were a little fortunate to go through so comfortably versus Flamengo, because I do think they scored a couple screamers. Flamengo actually were quite solid within the match and have been all tournament, but Flamengo come to the tournament with the expectation of being the best Brazilian team. There are now two Brazilian teams that have gone through. I think Dortmund probably the weakest European team, which is probably a lot of people's expectations. I remember in the comments last video, they were saying, don't go too heavily into Dortmund. They're a bad team. I ended up probably getting a lot of my points from Guirassy as a captain. So thankfully that worked out. Defense didn't work out so greatly, and that was sort of to be expected. That's why I trimmed down my defense at the end. But now we're heading into a stage where I think most of our investments really should be towards those top three teams, because we're already pre-invested, I suppose, into PSG and Munich. It's less of a chance that a lot of us own Chelsea, Al Hilal, and Real Madrid players, I think, in large amounts. So when we kind of adjust towards, let's say, the final, for example, you can see PSG moves up very high. But I think we're, as I said, because we're already so pre-invested into PSG, there's no real need to get there. And then Bayern Munich, you're matching up one team versus the other. So to me, this is all about the semifinals, trying to maximize on these Chelsea players if you think that they will actually beat Palmeiras. On the flip side, you might completely disagree with my analysis, right? You might think that actually Chelsea are still a pretty bad team and that Palmeiras are still underrated. In my opinion, I think as we get more sample size, I suppose our ability to make judgments on the different leagues improves. I will mention, of course, that the Inter Milan Fluminense result was extremely deserved for Fluminense. It's not really like there's been any flukes at this stage of the tournament. I think every team that's won so far has deserved to win. And even though Al Hilal probably created less chances on paper than Man City, I mean, you kind of have to give credit to things like finishing and so on and so forth. So, no major upset so far in terms of how the games have come out, right? I guess if Chelsea were knocked out by Benfica, I would say that would have been quite a big upset, because Chelsea were quite dominant for 85 minutes of the match, and Benfica didn't really lay a finger on them. So that's kind of the personal context as we go through. In my opinion, I think I'm going to put as many transfers possible into Chelsea players now that we have 4 free transfers at the stage of the tournament. And also, crucially, we can now move into owning 5 players from any team. So there's nothing stopping you, if you, let's say, own 1 Chelsea player, to go quadruple up into Chelsea, because not only are their semi-final percentages high, I mean, the chance that they get into the final is equally extremely high, as well as winning the championship. So that's why I think you can actually generally consider something like that, but I will probably take a little bit more of a balanced strategy. And also another thing to mention is that I think with the Chelsea forwards, the options aren't that interesting. Even Delap, I would say, doesn't intrigue me that much. There is quite a favored game, but Jackson is back from his suspension, and I think you'll see Delap's minutes kind of reduce. So the only position where I think, doesn't really make too much sense to invest fully into Chelsea into is probably that forward position. So now that we're jumping into the team selection phase, I just wanted to quickly recap how I did in match day 4, which was the round of 16. As I mentioned, there's obviously some massive upsets, so that's had a huge impact on my draft. I said probably that's going to, lead to 2 hits coming in for this game, but fortunately, I think the hits aren't that expensive, and I think even though, yes, I can in theory just field a player pool of 11, that sort of upside of having someone who can rotate and actually potentially have, the likes of a 9, 11 pointer, a 12 pointer even, is something that I think is worthwhile to sort of offset the hit. Not to mention, as I've mentioned multiple times, you just get so much more points for scoring points in the game if you do actually, get a clean sheet, score a goal, get the scouting bonus, things like that. You already know someone's going to have a pretty gigantic haul. And then, of course, there's still opportunities for blanks, as we've seen over the last few weeks. But the depth in the bench is quite crucial in sort of removing that impact. So I actually had 98 points last week, and it didn't go so well. As I mentioned, it was mostly because I opted for the Ederson plus Fabian Ruiz variation of things that could have been very much so Donnarumma and Bernardo Silva, but no regrets on that. I think it was an extremely close decision. Once again, something I'd call a 50-50, but as we know with fantasy games, things can go brutally wrong. Fabian Ruiz was subbed off at 45 minutes. Bernardo scored a tap-in goal, which was a bit controversial, and then Ederson did very fairly concede 4 goals to Al Hilal without making 3 saves within the match, and Donnarumma had a pretty easy timeout versus Inter Miami, thanks to anyone not named Messi ruining a lot of goal-scoring opportunities in the second half when I think PSG took their foot off the gas. So in the quarterfinals, what's the plan here? I think Real Madrid probably have the best expectations in terms of goals scored, but I think Chelsea probably have the best clean sheet odds. I haven't actually seen market level data on this yet, but that's just my general intuition. Chelsea, of course, have the highest odds of advancing anyway, so investing more into Chelsea in my extremely frail and weak defense makes a lot of sense to me. So starting from the defensive point of view, and I'm sure by the time I actually end up editing this video, we'll be able to share some of the kind of market level odds for the data, but I think investing in the Chelsea defense and Al Hilal defense makes a bit of sense to me. Maybe even going for a Real Madrid defender could be something that I opt doing in the end, but I actually think ultimately clean sheet odds are probably still better with Chelsea, so I like the idea of bringing in James, who should really play above that threshold of 60 minutes now that he's in important matches. I'd like to bring Colwell in just because he's sub 5% owned. Cucurella has been extremely attacking this tournament, and yes, of course, it might feel bad to not have him and his sort of attacking prowess, but equally I think that there's a 50-50 here to be made in terms of scouting bonus. And then of course I guess the natural boost, which is you go for a slightly lower owned player, you up the risk profile, and things can go well within my favor, because as we've seen so far, you can be a defender that's not necessarily your traditional super attacking defender like a Dumfries and still outscore these types of players with someone else within the team. So I don't know, Bastoni, a good example of that in a previous match day. Renan Lodi makes a lot of sense for me. He is also someone who gets subbed off a little bit earlier, not really early. He gets subbed off between that sort of threshold of 80 to 90 minutes for Al Hilal, but that's better. Technically, we've seen so far, right? A lot of these defenders actually get subbed off a little bit earlier. It actually feels like you've actually got a much higher chance of guaranteeing that clean sheet. So in the case of Renan Lodi and Reece James, I'm very much looking for that sort of end of the distribution in terms of outcomes. I'm not planning to do an Ederson transfer, so that probably means my defense ends up looking like Sanchez, no second keeper, Hakimi, Reece James, Renan Lodi, Colwell, and Ben Sebaini. As I said, transfer consideration here, Cucurella for consideration as well. But for now, I kind of like the sub 5% aspect of Colwell. James is currently sub 5% owned, but I'm sure he's going to fly way above that. Part of the reason why I still like James is the set piece threat is very much there. That kind of offsets versus Cucurella and his own sort of exploits within open play. Maybe that the 50-50 will actually be there instead, or maybe I'll own both. In the midfield, I clearly have to make only one transfer, and I think still keeping the PSG midfielders makes a lot of sense to me. I just don't have this sort of luxury of being able to sort of remove people who are not suspended, right? So Palmer joins the team. He replaces Phil Foden. I'll keep Arda Güler because I had a lot of money in the bank anyways as a result of going for him. He will probably now fly above 5%, which is not so nice because when I compare it to the likes of Valverde and also Bellingham, I guess you no longer have that advantage with Arda Güler. But I think within the sort of 75, 76 minutes, he tends to play every single match for Real Madrid before he gets subbed off for Luka Modric. He has been extremely effectual. He's on a lot of set pieces. Still has quite a few chances in open play in being able to sort of effectuate things. So I still really like him as a pick. Kvaratskhelia, probably not going to be captaining him this time round. But at the same time, I also look at a game like Bayern. I'm not necessarily expecting a clean sheet for PSG, so maybe somehow, some way, Hakimi will be someone that I dodge as a captain and not have him hurt me too much. Fabian Ruiz and Doué just to round off the team. In the forward line, there's obviously a lot of changes here that need to be made. Esposito and Haaland were the two players that I previously had. Guirassy still has a pretty okay game on paper. I think Real Madrid are expected to go through versus the BVB, but I can still see us very much conceding a goal. Guirassy has been a huge threat in this tournament, and as he has been really generally over the course of 2025. So I will be going with Guirassy and keeping him, then bringing in Marcos Leonardo and Mbappe. So Marcos Leonardo is actually just a straight swap with Esposito in terms of price point. It's quite nice that we actually have such a cheap beast. We've definitely neglected him over the course of this tournament. I know that a lot of my friends who've been playing Saudi Fantasy and also watching the Saudi League have mentioned, since Mitrovic has been injured, he's been absolutely crucial to this team. But I still have to say that was an absolute upset for me, at least within my understanding of football, for Al Hilal to actually beat Man City outright in goals, not even win on penalties, for example. And so that was very, very impressive. Leonardo is actually a player that I've played with or enjoyed the ownership of in Football Manager many a year. And it's actually so cool to see him in person. Obviously a very good poacher, as we've seen so far this tournament. And that's it. We're going to also bring in Mbappe. I think he's had hopefully enough time to almost get close to full fitness. And so actually responded to a news reporter sort of mentioning whether Gonzalo Garcia is going to start the next game in Matchday 5. And I think he was quite explicit in sort of mentioning that Mbappe has had a few more days to train. And so I think there was a pretty big hint there that Mbappe might start the next match. My personal opinion is that it's actually still possible that Mbappe will come off a little bit earlier in Matchday 5. But if I do expect Real Madrid to continuously do well, and since I don't really like some of the other forwards, like for example, I think between Delap and Jackson, the minutes aren't particularly good for the Chelsea forwards. When I look at some of the other fixtures, I just think they're not as tempting. So I am happy to have reduced Mbappe minutes because he's also a penalty taker for this Real Madrid team. And there is even a slim situation where I suppose he doesn't get subbed off. Real Madrid need to play. Gonzalo Garcia could be, an additional attacking sub as opposed to a like-for-like sub. He could even maybe come on for the likes of Vinny. We've seen someone like Rodrigo not utilize this tournament. I'm sure Garcia will continue to be used. But it could be Vinny, for example, who comes off earlier in some of these matches. And so that could be something that's quite impactful and beneficial to owning Mbappe in this stage. So that's kind of the plan. That will be a -6 in total with all the transfers that I've made. A bit of a shame that Piqueras got suspended, especially since he actually got that yellow card late in the second half of the game. And I think he didn't need to do it because there was a foul committed in the middle of the pitch. But that's what it is. So we're going to try round out this tournament. Hope you guys have a wonderful time. And I've enjoyed the content so far. I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Goodbye.